All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Cabral, Operational Assistant with Rare New England. You may hear us refer to our organization as RNE. RNE is a nonprofit organization devoted to bringing education and information about rare diseases to all who touch the rare disease community. Welcome to RNE's Career Fair in Medical Genetics. We're grateful to everyone for being here tonight. When we hear the word rare, we think of a small number, but in reality, there are collectively 30 million people diagnosed in the United States and around 350 million affected globally by a rare disease. Statistically, 80% of these rare disease patients have a genetic disorder. There are not enough geneticists to care for these patients, and this situation will only get worse as technology moves forward and patients are better and faster diagnosed. Remember, these patients are sick and may not be receiving appropriate help while they wait. They are hurting and sometimes dying because others don't understand what they are going through. Something must be done to help these families, and RNE is trying to make an effort in this area. Let me now introduce you to our host for tonight's event, Dr. Mark Corson. Dr. Corson is a pediatrician who specializes in metabolic genetics. He has directed the metabolic clinics at Children's Hospital and Tufts Medical Center in Boston. He is co-founder and co-director of the North American Metabolic Academy. Currently, he is director of the Physician Support Service and director of education at VMP Genetics. He is also a founding board member of Rare New England. A more complete biograph can be found in the Career Fair brochure sent to you. Through RNE, Dr. Corson has directed informational opportunities such as this career fair tonight in order to make a positive impact for all genetic disease stakeholders and is your host for this evening's event.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. And thank you everybody for attending RNE's Genetics Career Fair. I would first like to thank the following sponsors for their generous support of the career fairs: the New England Regional Genetics Network, Homology Medicines, Ionis Pharmaceuticals, Ultragenyx Pharmaceutical, and Vertex Pharmaceuticals. As Caroline said, my specialty is pediatrics with a focus on genetics as a subspecialty, specifically the area of biochemical or metabolic genetics. So if you think back on your biochemistry, I deal with patients and families who have defects in those biochemical pathways. Now, biochemistry can be abstract and rather dry, but it's that patient community that really puts the human back in biochemistry and shows how relevant the urea cycle or the electron transport chain really is. So why are we doing this program tonight? Well, genetics impacts almost every area of medicine. So as you can imagine, there's a growing need for geneticists in this country and abroad. Patients and families want and need to hear information about the diseases they have, information to plan their futures, information as a couple with a family history looking to have children, information about effective therapies now available for genetic disorders. And considering that there are 7,000 rare diseases, not all genetic, and growing, that's a lot of information that needs to be shared. But the impact of genetics is not just in rare diseases. Genetics impacts how we manifest a lot of mainstream diseases, including COVID, how we respond to disease, how we utilize medications, what medications are available or effective or safe, and so on. This evening, you're going to hear from 3 physicians who specialize in the area of genetics: a general clinical geneticist, a specialist who treats patients with genetic metabolic diseases, and a laboratory geneticist. You'll hear a bit about what they're doing, how their genetics expertise has helped to treat their patients and families, and how their experience has impacted their own lives. A Q&A session follows the 3 presentations. Please submit your questions as we go in the Q&A area. After that, I'll guide you through some additional opportunities to learn more about genetics as a career choice. But first, you might think that liking biochemistry makes me a nerd, and the fact that I bring some biochemistry into the clinic makes me even more of a nerd. Well, I am a nerd, but we genetics nerds can have fun. Let me show you how with this very interesting genetic pedigree. Many, many years ago, when I was 23, I was married to a widow who was pretty as can be. This widow had a grown-up daughter who had hair of red. My father fell in love with her, and soon they two were wed. This made my dad my son-in-law and really changed my life. Now my daughter was my mother, 'cause she was my father's wife. To complicate the matter, even though it brought me joy, I soon became the father of a bouncing baby boy. My little baby then became a brother-in-law to dad, and so became my uncle, though it made me very sad. For if he was my uncle, then that also made him brother of the widow's grown-up daughter, who of course was my stepmother. Father's wife then had a son who kept him on the run, and he became my grandchild, for he was my daughter's son. My wife is now my mother's mother, and it makes me blue, because although she is my wife, she's my grandmother too. Now, if my wife is my grandmother, then I'm her grandchild. And every time I think of it, it nearly drives me wild, because now I have become the strangest case you ever saw. As husband of my grandmother, I am my own grandpa. Oh, I'm my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. I'm my own grandpa, written by Mo Jaffe and Dwight Latham, 1948. Look it up on YouTube. It's everywhere. But you saw the pedigree here first. So at this point, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Pamela Trepane from the University of Florida in Jacksonville. She is the chief of pediatric genetics at the University of Florida in Jacksonville. She received her medical degree from the University of Texas Health Science Center, San Antonio. She completed her pediatric residency and clinical genetics fellowship at the University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics. She also serves on the executive committee of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Genetics. Her primary clinical interests are in neurofibromatosis and the connective tissue disorders, and she's a member of the Clinical Care Advisory Board for Children's Tumor Foundation. Dr. Trepane also received a Master of Medical Education from the University of Iowa, where she was actively involved in both undergrad and graduate level medical education. She has trained and mentored numerous physicians throughout their education and careers as a didactic course director and fellowship director. For more information, please see her bio in the career fair brochure. So at this point, I want to welcome Dr. Trepane. Thank you. Turn on your microphone and welcome to our career fair.
Thank you very much. And I will not be singing. So growing up, they gave me a flute to keep me from doing exactly that. So I am a clinical geneticist. I am a general clinical geneticist. I do have some areas of expertise in both the neurofibromatoses and connective tissue disorders, but all of us touch different areas of all the areas of genetics, including a little bit of metabolic. I try to get people diagnosed and then over to the right people doing biochemistry. I started my career now 20 years ago. Time goes by very quickly. Over that period of time, whenever I finished residency in pediatrics, we had not sequenced the human genome yet. And so I was really good at drawing Punnett squares, and I'm still very good at that, and drawing pedigrees for people. And that can still be very helpful whenever we're trying to figure out what is going on with a family. I've been amazed over this past 20 years at how our technology has moved us forward and being able to make good, solid diagnoses in what we call the diagnostic odyssey. Recently, we've had some very interesting cases, some of which should be fairly simple and straightforward. We had a mom with twins who are now 10, 11 years old, that were kind of short, were in special education, but very friendly, very chatty. And when we looked at them, we thought they had Williams syndrome, and indeed they did. And talking to the mom about that diagnosis, she was very relieved because of that very special personality that they have. She's been trying to explain this to people for 10, 11 years now, and they kept saying, well, it's just how you're parenting the children. And it's like, no, That is not how you're parenting the children. That's their personalities and who they are. And so she was very relieved, one, to get that diagnosis, and two, to be able to be validated in her suspicions that there was more than just her children were displaying developmental delays. We've had some people that have been held under diagnoses that are more general, that we don't understand what's going on with profound intellectual disability, seizure disorders, and through our newer technologies of whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing, we're really honing in on making good, solid diagnoses for people, some of which are well known. They're rare, but well known. And then others that we go back and look at the medical literature, and there's one paper that has now recently been published within the last 2 years with 30 patients with that diagnosis. So genes that I've never heard of before that encode for things that I've never seen before. They didn't teach to me in medical school because we didn't know they existed at that point in time. I have one patient, whenever I first got here, her diagnostic odyssey included going from having a negative whole exome to having a positive one, because she was one of 4 people in the world that they found with this very rare, obviously, disorder that is recessive in nature. And having to explain that to the parents, it was a neurodegenerative disease. And she passed away by about age 2.5 of her disorder, but at least they knew it is a recessive condition, and their second child was also affected. But they know that going into it, and are then able, like you said, to be able to make plans for their family and how they want to do their family planning, and not with their second child know sort of what is to be expected, as opposed to all the fear that went into what was going on with their first child. So it does help people sort of parameterize what they're going through. I find the high technology to be very exciting and to give us really great answers. The other part of this is it's very low tech. We get to spend a lot of time with our patients and just talking to them and finding out how they're doing and supporting them through all of these processes. If anybody's ever gone through our healthcare system, it can be very alienating, and you get bounced around to a lot of people that may care a lot, but they don't have a lot of time. And one of the things that we get is a little bit more time to sit with people and to be present with them and listen. And often that's worth more than all of our technology is, even when we still don't know what is causing their child's problems. Just the ability to be with them and to be present through that, what we call the diagnostic odyssey, and to be supportive of the families. I find that very rewarding, being present with the families. We do get an opportunity to be specialist, even though we get really rare things, we can be specialist in areas. So I do neurofibromatosis as a specialty, and you get to feel like you're a specialist at those things. And then also connective tissue disorders, including things like Marfan's and thoracic aortic aneurysms. So taking that family history and drawing the pedigree is very helpful in knowing who we should be testing and who should be getting surveillance imaging to be able to save people's lives. So even though we're not on the front line per se out there in the emergency room treating traumas, we can be very helpful when people show up to the emergency room to know what they should be doing and how they should be treating some of these rare conditions. You're still on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Okay. Sorry, thank you.
I can talk for a whole, like hours if you want me to. But
All
I
right.
bet you want to hear from other people too.
All right. So tell you what, let's go on to our next speaker, and there will be opportunity to answer questions and tell more afterwards. Our next speaker is Dr. Georgianne Arnold from the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Dr. Arnold graduated from Indiana University and received a master's in medical genetics from Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. She received her MD from Upstate Medical University and completed her residency in pediatrics at Northwestern and a fellowship in clinical genetics and clinical biochemical genetics at the University of Colorado. Dr. Arnold has been a clinical and biochemical geneticist for 30 years. She is currently the clinical research director for pediatric genetics and genomics at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Her interests are in clinical outcomes research and development of clinical practice protocols. Also, she completed 2 years as president, just completed 2 years as president of the Society for Inherited Metabolic Disorders, the professional society for biochemical genetics in this country. For more information about Dr. Arnold, please see her bio in the career fair brochure. Welcome, Dr. Arnold. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So my journey as a geneticist had quite a few twists and turns. But really, most successful people are not doing exactly what they started out to do at the beginning. They take new paths as new opportunities arise. In truth, I never wanted to be a doctor. I flirted with the idea of being a pediatrician in my early teen years until I saw a TV show about a child with leukemia, and the parents couldn't bear to tell the child that they were going to die, so they asked the pediatrician to do it. And I thought, oh my God, I'd never be strong enough to do that. And so I put that idea away. But then in high school biology, I was completely captivated by Gregor Mendel. I thought genetics was the most exciting thing I'd ever done. And I even picked my college, Indiana University, because that's where Morgan did all of his work. And the college catalog listed it as having a major in genetics, although I eventually found out that was not true. But I was the only one on my academic, quiet dorm floor who wasn't pre-med. And I think I might be the only one who ended up in med school. I even tried to get a job washing glassware in Tracy Sonborn's lab. He was a renowned paramecium geneticist, but he wouldn't hire me because he didn't want anybody curious. He wanted some non-science major who was going to wash the glasses and go home and not ask him questions. But after college, I entered a PhD program in medical genetics at Indiana University. And much to my surprise, I learned what really made me happy was when they forced me to go to clinic, which most of the grad students absolutely hated. But I really wasn't all that happy when they let me work in my lab. Also around this time, my dad died of cancer and I had some upheavals in my private life, and I discovered I was made of tougher stuff than I thought. So I had some wonderful mentors who guided me to medical school and then a pediatric residency and then a genetics fellowship. Nowadays, you can take a year off that because you can combine a pediatric residency and a genetic fellowship into a 5-year residency. And at that time, I thought I wanted to be a dysmorphologist like my mentors or somebody who studies birth defects. But totally by surprise, during my genetics fellowship, I was smitten with biochemical genetics. As Mark said, it's kind of for nerds, but it's really cool. So from the outside, it looks intimidating and difficult. But the truth is, if you strip everything down to the pathway, it all makes absolute sense. I mean, why do they call the metabolism of fat beta oxidation? Because the process oxidizes the beta carbon of the fatty acid. Duh. So, Katherine Johnson in the movie Hidden Figures said math is always reliable, but I can tell you, biochemistry is always reliable. The field of biochemical genetics has wonderful opportunities. It's a small pond. It's not quite so hard to be a big fish in a small pond. There's only actually a few hundred clinicians boarded in biochemical genetics, and they're needed everywhere. We have meetings in good places. I've been to Japan, Australia, Brazil, Greece, and most of Europe for meetings. And what I really like is that you get to be a doctor and a scientist, which is something that I think is really special. So you have your share of bread and butter cases like every other specialty, but you also have the opportunity to work through rare and fascinating cases and to be involved in clinical research or basic science research, to work with patients of all ages, to pull people back from hyperammonemic coma, but also share the joy of helping a family through a difficult time. And there's really nothing like having a parent thank you for saving their baby's life. So around 20 years ago or so, the NIH saw that they had all these new gene discoveries, but they were not training people to translate them into clinical practice. So they started a grant award series called K Awards or K Grants, which was an introductory grant to teach physicians how to do clinical research. So I was the recipient of a 5-year grant, which totally changed the focus of my work from primarily clinical care to primarily clinical research. So I started out to be a geneticist as a PhD. I ended up going to medical school to be a dysmorphologist or a birth defects geneticist. I got hooked onto biochemical genetics and then eventually hooked into clinical research in biochemical genetics. So it's a little bit of a wavy path. So in 2010, I moved to University of Pittsburgh, Children's Hospital Pittsburgh, to be clinical, and now I'm the clinical research director in the Division of Genetics and Genomics. So a career in genetics has endless possibilities. Basic scientist, clinical researcher, laboratory director, clinician, to study genes, chromosomes, cancer, birth defects, biochemical defects, patients of all ages, entire families. One thing I can promise you about genetics, you'll never be bored. And don't let the length of training cool your ardor for pursuing this. You're going to be 30 anyway someday, so you might as well be doing something really cool. So I am happy to talk to anyone, and I'm not going to sing to you like Mark did, but I'm happy to talk to anyone if you are interested in asking more questions.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. On to our third speaker before our Q&A. Remember, if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them there. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Manko Lek from Yale New Haven Medical Center in New Haven, Connecticut. Dr. Lek received an undergraduate degree in engineering, computer engineering in 2000 at the University of New South Wales and then worked for IBM for 3.5 years. He returned to the university and completed an undergraduate degrees in physiology and engineering, specifically bioinformatics, and received the University Medal in 2007. He completed his PhD at the University of Sydney in 2012 with a thesis concerning the functional differences between alpha-actinin 2 and alpha-actinin 3. He did his postdoctoral training in Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and the Broad Institute. For more information about Dr. Lek, please see his bio in the Career Fair brochure. Welcome, Dr. Lek, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Cool. Thanks, Mark, for the great introduction. And I'll be the third speaker to say you don't want to hear me sing. It's not good at all. Even with an Australian accent, it will not be good at all. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey also. And try and explain the weird turns it took, as you know, Mark was saying about all the different degrees I did. So the reason why I switched careers from being a software developer is that I have a rare disease myself. I have a rare limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and I got a clinical diagnosis when I was working in IBM, official clinical diagnosis. And at the time, I was frustrated because they didn't know what the genetic cause was and things like that. So I was on a diagnostic odyssey, as Pamela was saying in her talk about the diagnostic odyssey. So I've experienced it myself, the diagnostic odyssey. So I was frustrated I didn't understand why it took so long to find the gene. Also, if I knew what gene was causing my disease, what could you do about it? And that set me off on a journey to go back to university, retrain, and become a geneticist. And so when I finally did get a genetic diagnosis, it was still in Australia. I wanted to actually do some training in the United States, in Boston, because I believe that no one should wait over 10 years to get a genetic diagnosis. And as Pam was saying, that at the time of this transition, this was in 2012, that exome sequencing now became more affordable. So one of the great projects I got to lead and work on was undiagnosed cohort from Australia that were looking for answers. And so in the first 6 months, we were able to find the genetic cause. It was a novel disease gene for Nemaline myopathy in the first family that we sequenced from Australia. So this family has been going on a journey for over 10 years. I would argue that the paperwork took longer than the sequencing and the analysis. that goes around doing human genetics and rare disease genetics. So this is how far we've come with the technology. But, you know, the main sort of like highlight of my time at the Broad Institute, I got to work on an amazing large projects such as the 1,000 Genomes Project, the GTEx project. So the 1,000 Genomes Project was the first ever project to try and sequence and look at all the variants and diversity across the globe, and hence the 1,000 genomes. So diversity in Africans, diversity in Europeans, and also diversity in East Asians, and that expanded out to many more countries around the world. But, you know, and while the GTEx project was looking at the relationship between genetic variants and the RNA that's being expressed across many different tissues and also many different regions of the brain. So this was from over 1,000 human donors who generously donated, you know, material from their bodies. But the feature of working at the Broad during my postdoctoral research was to work on the Exome Aggregation Consortia project. So I got to lead that. And so that was a large database of human genetic variation that clinical geneticists would use to interpret rare variants that they discovered in genes that were sequenced, either gene panels or exome sequencing, because at the time we didn't have such a large resource. And so, and then that later became the Nomad project, but it was a fantastic project to be working on, to know the impact it was making, and that, you know, a lot of the clinical geneticists and also clinical genetics labs were using it around the world, not only just my research colleagues. And so I transitioned to Yale because, you know, that was a fantastic thing to work on. And the last thing I did work on before I transitioned to Yale was I worked on the leading a team in the Center of Mendelian Genomics, and that was to work on the hardest of the hard. So the ones that have gone through clinical genetics labs and now have become research projects to actually find the novel genes or genetic variants that are actually causing their disease using exome sequencing, genome sequencing, and also RNA sequencing. So another fantastic project that, you know, I got an opportunity to work on and contribute to add to all the novel genes that cause genetic diseases. And so I transitioned to Yale because I was not only just interested in making a career on delivering bad news faster and developing methods to deliver bad news faster, I also wanted to translate some of that information because I'm a rare disease patient myself. So during my time at Yale, we work on a lot of different genetic therapies, promising genetic therapies on patient cells, animal models, with the hope to actually translate that to the clinic. So we're undergoing a revolution, not just in gene replacement delivered by AAV, but also using CRISPR technologies, which are programmable and can be very patient mutation specific. So, you know, I hope that, you know, in the coming, you know, 5 to 10 years, we transition from what we call personalized medicine. Well, this is what Peter Marks from FDA terms personalized medicine, using available off-the-shelf therapies personalized to someone's genome or situation to individualize therapies, knowing what their genetic mutation is and designing a therapy specifically for their mutation. So I'm very excited for the, you know, for the, you know, upcoming future. And if I was a person in this audience, I'd be really excited that I wish I was a lot younger, because then I'd see a lot more of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Leck. It's terrific to get these very personal perspectives on what moved you through your lives and why you ended up in genetics. So at this point, I invite people to, again, submit questions. And some of you actually submitted questions beforehand. So let's begin. Pam, question for you. How much in-person patient interaction would a clinical geneticist have?
That can vary depending on how you set up your practice. Mine, we schedule 90-minute appointments for our patients. Not everybody uses the whole 90 minutes, and some people use more than that. I've had several 2 to 3 hour sessions with patients going through, their diagnosis, their grieving, all of the things. So there's a lot of face-to-face interaction in what I do. There's also, if you spend that much time with a patient, you don't see very many patients in a day or in a week. And there's a lot of behind the scenes. I think you had reference to about how much paperwork there is to fill out. It's much easier just when you get the test result back and trying to explain the science than it is doing all the paperwork. And my team is now big enough. We have some people behind the scenes that are helping with that part of it as well. But the face-to-face time is key. I did 2 years of general pediatrics for the military, and you get 15 minutes per patient. I talk way too much. This was not a good plan. I love general pediatrics, but you don't really get to spend that fulfilling time with families and knowing what they're going through.
Okay. Georgianne, what are the job prospects in the near to long-term future? How do you see genetics evolving in the next 10 years? Your microphone is off.
There are many unfilled jobs in genetics. There are really not enough geneticists right now, particularly biochemical geneticists. But there are also other aspects. There's cancer genetics, there's prenatal genetics. Right now at UPMC, we lost both of our prenatal geneticists. We have none. We have one cancer geneticist. So I think the job prospects in genetics are excellent.
And actually, the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics did a survey in the fall of 2019, which showed openings that were at least posted for 6 to 12 months of over 100 different positions. So I agree, lots of opportunity and an expanding opportunity in genetics for positions. Pam, how involved are you with genetic counselors? And if you are, what kind of work do you do with them?
So at the moment, we are without a genetic counselor. So I'm playing the part of the genetic counselor. So by playing both the part of the medical geneticist and then trying to be support genetic counselor for a wide variety of my specialists across our institutions here in Jacksonville. We have a new genetic counselor who will start with us this first part of June, and I am very much looking forward to him starting with us. Over the years, the training program that I was at UT Houston was also a genetic counseling training program. So I sat in those same classes. So I think I do an okay job at doing genetic counseling. And then in Wisconsin, where it was in Milwaukee for a while, we had a host of genetic counselors there, as we did in Iowa. And so I worked in several different versions where we work together. And then as the genetic counselors are getting licensure, we're being able to hand over, a fair amount of the genetic counseling specific tasks back to the genetic counselors. In Florida, unfortunately, they don't have licensure. So we still have to go in as a team together and work that part of it, so that way that I'm still in the room at some point during that service. So there's a variety of different setups in order to do this. It really depends on the environment that you're working in, which is going to be the best setup and the most efficient and the best use of everyone's time.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Leck, here's a sort of a personal question. So many scientists and or clinicians talk about how they are absolutely in love with science. However, I've begun to feel some apathy towards my research. How would you suggest going about finding that spark to pursue a fulfilling career?
That's a very difficult question. But it's an interesting question. So the only advice I have is sometimes when you're stuck in the day-to-day grind of whatever your research involves, sometimes it can get tedious. And it's to have a step back and have a look at the impact that, if the research is successful, that will have on patients' lives. And, if it's patient-centric, if it's everything will feed back to something that will benefit the patient, things like that. And for some of my students, when they feel that way about their research because experiments aren't working, or they're just doing something that they find quite boring, things like that, I'd say, well, why don't you just go and meet some of the patients that your research is about and things like that. And I think that every time we come back from a patient conference that are led for the patients and for the patients, all my students, that they just get this extra burst of energy because they understand the importance of what they're doing, even though their day-to-day grind at that moment may feel unimportant, things like that. It's just stepping back and thinking about the big picture, and also being a little bit patient. Sometimes when you think about your journey, sometimes I get impatient also, but then I think, wow, it's only been 2 years, so maybe I should be patient, or things like that.
Okay, thank you. Georgianne, I'm interested in both medical genetics and rural medicine. Do you have any advice you could give me in potentially serving a rural community within the specialty?
Well, it's a good question. Right now, there are clinics that have been set up to serve the Amish rurally. And I think that it's really been wonderful for them. So for certain groups, that may be a way to serve that. Otherwise, you will probably have to find the right audience, get people to refer to your practice. That can be, people are more likely to refer maybe to a major med center, so you may need to have to work at building your practice a little bit more if you're in a rural kind of setting. But certainly there are lots of places in this country, particularly out in the West, where people like have to take an airplane to go see the doctor. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities there to set up a practice that would be a regional rural practice.
And I would just add to that there are clinics like the one in Salt Lake City, like the one in Portland, where like the one in Denver, which actually where the doctors there go into rural communities in neighboring states, like much smaller cities, because the patients can't get there. So they have regular regional clinics outside the major medical centers. So there's an opportunity there as well. Plus, and of course, what COVID has taught all of us is that sometimes this can be done, remotely. And that's actually a particular interest of mine, doing remote medicine and assisting physicians who are on site diagnose and manage their patients. So there is an opportunity there.
Can I add to, I spent
Yeah.
9 years in Iowa, and we had a very robust regional program where we would travel to different locations throughout the state. And I think that this whole if there's nothing good that comes out of COVID, it is the fact that we've now all learned how to do telemedicine, and we're all now pros at this Zoom thing we're doing. And that allows us to do a lot more of this telemedicine. Every state has rural areas. Each, as clearly as you go more west, that gets a huge expanse of space, but there's definitely a need there. And I think that telemedicine is going to change a lot of this conversation.
Okay. An a question for everyone. What advice do you have for third-year medical students preparing to apply for a combined pediatrics medical genetics residency program? What are the pros and cons of applying for a combined program versus the traditional route of a genetics fellowship after a pediatric, or I guess internal medicine residency?
Well, I personally found that third year of pediatric residency was very helpful to me in terms of cementing my emergent medical skills. So very helpful to me as a biochemical geneticist. But people coming out of the 4-year combined programs seem to be doing very well. And if you want to do an extra year of medical biochemical, you still end up in the 5 years. So if I had had that option back when I trained, I probably would have taken the combined program.
Okay.
And I would kind of echo that same thing. I mean, whenever I was in training, it was a 3+2. So you had to finish your residency in peds or in another primary specialty. And I might add too, like one of my fellows, I've had a fellow that was OB-GYN and then did an MFM and genetics fellowships. I've had family practitioners, internal medicine. And so it's not peds specific. Most of us have been pediatricians, but we need more people who are comfortable on the adult side, because as Dr. Arnold will tell you, just because you reach 18 doesn't mean you stop having your metabolic disease or that you won't get pregnant. And so we need a few more people out there that are comfortable across that lifespan. I think the combined programs do a great job of cementing all of that. I think we need a younger person here to do a compare and contrast, because the other thing that I had too was the ability to moonlight and it not count against any work hours. So there were quite a few differences in training between then and now. But I think the combined, it shortens the amount of time, which will also get you out and working sooner, which means you start making money sooner, which is usually also a huge concern for students now, not so much 20 or 30 years ago at a state school.
If you're internal medicine and genetics trained, I have a job for you tomorrow.
We all do.
In fact, even if you just say that you want to do that, we could probably give you the job. So, all right, well, let's talk about money. And this question comes this way, a tricky question to ask politely. I know medical geneticists are one of the lowest paid medical specialties. How can I balance my interest in this area with my lots and lots of medical school debt?
Wow. Some programs are better paid than others. If you want to go to a big, famous, big medical center place, you're probably not going to get paid particularly well. Whereas a lot of the smaller hospitals are paying geneticists a very competitive wage with people who are in private practice. Many of my fellows start out at more than I make now when they go to some of these places. So it doesn't have to be awful. It depends a little bit on your interest in what you're willing to do. The other thing I would tell you is you're going to get up and do this every day for 30 years. And if you pick a high paid specialty that you're not really happy with, you will be trading money for your well-being, which is not going to work well in 30 years.
The other thing, there are other opportunities that come, at least I can speak from the clinical side, consultation type opportunities from industry that pay well. There's also, sometimes you get legal cases if you're interested in that, also pays, top dollar. So there are ways of supplementing your salary. If you're interested in that, it's a broader view of what people do in this specialty.
I was doing insurance case reviews for a little while. I just got too busy to continue them.
Okay.
And it's always nice whenever there's another geneticist on the other end of your insurance case review.
Oh yeah.
Because then you get to the heart of the matter much more quickly. From the money standpoint, I would have to, agree with Dr. Arnold. Money is part of it, and you don't want to be so deep in debt because that is your also part of your mental health. But knowing that you love what you do and finding your tribe. All right. So I was told during medical school, pay attention during your third year rotations. Who do you like hanging out with? Do you like hanging out with the surgeons? If you do, that's great. One of my friends was great, wanted to be a surgeon, and he said he would never want to be a pediatrician. Every time he came in the room, the kids cried. It was a horrible experience for him, and I have the reverse. I go into a room and I love playing with kids. I had a child in clinic today who was clearly autistic. The mom kept apologizing, and I'm like, he's fine. Great, he's making noise, but not so much that we can't have a conversation. And so figuring out where where your heart is in it. And I think all the rest of it will come. And I know that sounds kind of, all rosy and everything else, but it may take time to pay off the loans. But do what you love, and you'll be much more emotionally rewarded by doing that.
Thank you. Dr. Leck, I want to pursue a PhD. How do I choose at the medical school where to do that? What kind of things need to be going through my head?
That's a fantastic question because I get to interview a lot of these students for admissions for both PhD and also the MD PhD. My advice to a lot of these students when I'd love them all to come to our school, but my advice to them is to pick a place where you like the research they're doing appeals to you. Don't think about the name of the place because the PhD is about a training experience. And so think about where you want to go, whether you like the research and whether you like the training philosophy of that place rather than, I tend to say to these students, don't worry about the big nature publications and things like that, because your PhD is about training you to become a scientist and to become a good scientist. And, and if the stars align, you'll get those publications that, that everyone envies and things like that. But a lot of the times, the stars really do have to align for you to get all those, to get that publication. It's a luck thing. So I'd rather students pick things that aren't based on luck and based on solid training, basically. So that's my number one recommendation. Have a look what their philosophy of training is. Have a look at the makeup of the lab. Is it mostly postdocs? Is it mostly staff scientists? Or is it a good mixture of students, postdocs, and things like that? And whether you actually like that environment for your training.
Actually, one question added to that. Do you have an opportunity to talk to the people who are working there or training there, get their impressions?
Sorry. Yeah. Like in my own department,
Yeah.
are you asking?
No,
Yeah,
generally.
I do, and a lot of them are happy with their choice. Mainly after talking to that. So mainly because I won't name any other universities that we compete with, but it's just to talk about whether the lab itself is research and publication focused versus training focused. And it's just to make sure the students understand the distinction between the two and where they are at their career stage.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing their experience. As genetic science continues to make advances, it seems like every medical specialty will eventually require its physicians to be fluent in genetics. How do you see the role of clinical geneticists evolving as genetic science becomes a larger part of the patient care and counseling? Georgianne, Pam?
So I keep trying in my medical education way in training all of our clinicians in the genetics of their specialties. So if you think about most of our specialists who are my age, they may have gotten a little bit of genetics, but remember we hadn't sequenced the whole genome at that point. And so the training was really quite minimal. And if they've been paying attention, they may have learned a little bit about their specialty. My neuromuscular doctors actually know quite a bit of genetics. My neurologist in seizure disorders, cardiologists who do arrhythmias and myopathies, I work with them on a routine basis, playing that part of that backup genetic counselor when they get test results back that are not so quite straightforward, and it's not really their area of expertise in reading those reports. So my job is really educating people in the genetics of what they do, because we don't see people with cystic fibrosis. We don't see people with sickle cell anemia. The hematologist, the pulmonologist take care of those very well. But there's still people like the metabolic disorders fall to us. My patients with NF1, they need somebody who understands their entire disease process. It's affecting their entire body. Even for the connective tissue disorders, they may need someone that remembers not only do you need a cardiologist, but you need an orthopedist and you need an ophthalmologist. And helping do more of that clinical care coordination once you've identified the rare condition. And even if you're not doing very much at all, the parents really like coming to talk to somebody who knows what their child has when you are one of 30 people or one of 4. And I might be just sitting there talking to them about the most recent paper, but we all know, as opposed to when you go in to see your regular doctor, they don't know. And on the flip side, their quote regular doctors need some guidance as well. And they're very happy when we're there partnering with them to provide excellent health care for these people with rare conditions, because they're going to know how to do within their scope and how do we help them. So I think it's really very much the teamwork method in knowing how to do the testing, how to get the right diagnosis, and helping in that management.
Thank you. All right, we'll do one more question, and then I'm going to go over opportunities that that you might consider for additional exploration into genetics as a career choice. Question, I guess, for either Pam or Georgianne. Insurance coverage is a major issue in ordering genetic tests like exome and genome sequencing. What suggestions do you have to help the field overcome these barriers?
How political do you want to be, Dr. Arnold?
Yeah, I have to say I've been kind of spoiled, as in always having worked in places that allowed us to do most of the testing that we needed to do. I did do a locum tenens for 7 months, actually in Orlando, where I found certain insurers very difficult to work with. When I was doing the consulting for insurance denials, I actually learned a few tricks about how they look at your applications for genetic testing that I found extremely helpful. I thought all I had to do was make a good case about, what was considered, state of the art and standard of care. And in fact, all I have to do is show that the patient meets their criteria. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. My Canadian friends tell me they spend time writing to the ministry to get rare things covered, as I do writing to insurance companies, but the difference is they get them covered. I don't know. But yes, it does depend on how political you want to be.
Because a lot of it, I think, is just built into how our healthcare system works. And so depending on what your insurer is, depends on how much coverage we get, and depending on which state you're in, that can vary back and forth. So I think there needs to be some better overhaul of our quote system. For 20 plus years, genetics has been the future of medicine. Okay, great. So I'd like to get this genetic test. Oh, no, that's experimental. So I don't know how we're both the future and always experimental. I have difficulty reconciling that. So if you want to know what we complain about the most, it's arguing with insurance companies to get coverage for our patients.
Wouldn't you say, though, that over time, that the field does move towards supporting these tests?
It does. Whenever chromosomal microarray first came out, nobody would pay for it. So we just kept ordering it and kept ordering it. And now it's rare that I have to argue that one. I actually get a fair amount of whole exomes covered, much better than panel tests. They don't like the CPT codes with the panel test. And it's like, fine, we'll just get an exome. Every now and then I have to actually argue for a karyotype. I find that very odd and bizarre the days I have to do that. But most of it takes time, but we're getting there. So it is the future of medicine, but you have to actually show that it's going to be helpful to your patient. What the insurance companies don't really get is that it can be emotionally helpful, or planning for your family planning, deciding how you want to move forward with a pregnancy. That's so much, like Dr. Arnold said, it's that they're looking for their strict criteria. So if you know what they're actually looking for, you get much better coverage.
Mark, I want to jump in and say from a research point of view, so and also from a patient's point of view, so patients with neuromuscular diseases do have the option to get panel testing from companies that are willing to offer it for free, like Invitae, the Lantern Project from PerkinElmer, and other places like that. And I know that a lot of my physician and clinical geneticist colleagues have used those as opportunities for particular patients, and making sure that, you know, keeping the patient's well-being in mind, that it's not predatory how they're going about actually offering these tests. And the other thing is that a lot of the research cohorts that, and also research clinicians that we collaborate with, they create research cohorts and use their research funds to make the discovery, but then the variant is validated in a clinical setting. So there are other possibilities also in that, and in less less well-funded countries outside the United States, this is how people usually do it, like in Australia, Eastern Europe, and things like that. The discovery is in a research setting, while the validation is in a clinical setting.
Right. All right, thank you. So just in the last few minutes, actually one person had asked about how to obtain additional exposure in that field before getting in genetics before getting to medical school. So that's what I just want to review a little bit now. And so I'm going to share my screen. And so here are some learning opportunities to consider. One is to have a one-on-one conversation with a geneticist. So again, a general clinical geneticist, biochemical, metabolic research and or industry geneticist. It's an opportunity for you to talk to a geneticist about your career and about their career and their interests, and about your interests. And so if this is of interest to you, with the people on tonight's panel, let us know and we can put you in touch with them. But it's good to prepare a letter of intent and provide a CV. That'll make the conversation more productive. The American Society of Human Genetics has career interviews published on their website. And in these printed interviews, researchers discuss their scientific and career journeys and some of the interesting teaching and public health initiatives in which they've participated. And there is the link, and this will come to you. We'll send this out to you following tonight's program. On-site electives. It's an opportunity to shadow a geneticist as she or he sees patients, hear about the patient, hear about the disease and the concerning issues of the day. Arranging electives usually requires planning and hospital clearance. Again, let us know, send us a letter of intent and a CV, and we'll try and get you hooked up with a geneticist near you. In COVID era and in the area of remote medicine, RNE is doing some online electives, which is an online counterpart to the in-hospital experience. It's an opportunity to hear about 2 or 3 diseases and from 2 or 3 patients. The whole thing is about 60 to 75 minutes, and each elective has a particular theme, like muscle symptoms or brain dysfunction. Let us know. We actually have 2 scheduled on April 28th and May 11th, so give that a consideration. RNE also sponsors the Rare Disease Day Speaker Series, which traditionally, it goes from January to March. Rare Disease Day is the last day each year in February. And during that 1 hour, there's a 1 hour presentation with a 15-minute brief overview, and then a patient or caregiver talks about the experience in living with the disease. This was our speaker series this past January and February at 13 different sites in New England, representing a large variety of mostly genetic and metabolic disorders. The American College of Medical Genetics has a Summer Scholars Program. Unfortunately, this is done for this year because the application was due this past February. But if you're in your first year of medicine, and it's really limited to that, it's an opportunity to get a funded summer 6-week elective experience. And there is a link at the bottom there as well. So that would be open next year in early 2022 for first-year medical students. And finally, the Global Genes Rare Compassion Project. Accepted applicants can be medical, healthcare students, are matched with rare disease patients and families. Applications are accepted year-round and matches occur quarterly. And the applicants are eligible to submit an essay to qualify for a scholarship for Rare Compassion. And there you have your link again. So at this point, I would like to close this session, but first, please participate in our evaluation. And Caroline will get that started right now. In the meantime, I want to thank Doctors Monkolek, Georgia-Ann Arnold, and Pan Cherpain for participating this evening and sharing your passion about genetics. And thank you all for attending, and stay involved, stay connected, and reach out if you have questions or further interest. Thank you so much.
I like how you tell us we can't vote.
Well, again, thank you so much. And if you have any ideas on how to make these things better, we'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to engage you all in, we're going to do another couple next fall. And we used to restrict it to when we were doing these in person, it made sense perhaps to do them within the region, but if they're remote, it doesn't make sense at all. So hopefully we can expand them and create more of them.
Yeah.
I think this is a nice venue. This is one of the better things about all the COVID stuff that has happened, is now that we just open everything up and invite everybody in. I think that's kind of a nice idea too, because you can get people from across the United States in different areas and different, as Dr. Arnold pointed out, going to a different state to practice gives you new and unique things. There are things different here than there were in Iowa, just about the insurance standpoint. And I still love reading your notes though when I find one. I know it's going to be good.
I need to go off.
All right.
Right.
Well, thank you so very, very much.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Thank
Good
you.
night all.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so
Good
much.
to see you.
Good night.